Welcome to the Clovis Church of Christ Sermon Podcast. Thank you for listening.
Okay, I'm going to try not to bore you too much this morning. There are some details that we're going to be going over. You might want to take a few notes if you're the studious type, and hopefully you'll get something good out of this. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, and this is the outline that we're using. You'll notice that we haven't gotten out of the first section yet. Chapters 1 through 4, the beginning, and that's where we currently are. The incidents that we have looked at so far, we've seen the genealogy of Jesus. We have seen Joseph's role in the birth of Jesus, the visit of the Magi, and then we have seen Mary and Joseph fleeing to Egypt and Herod going after the infants around Bethlehem. Now, those are the incidents that we've discussed, but we have spent a lot of time talking about Matthew's use of prophecy. Now, by now, you remember Edersheim's statement, or at least the gist of what Edersheim had to say on the way Jews looked at prophecy in the Old Testament prior to the coming of Jesus. You notice what is in red. It is explained that all the miracles and deliverances of Israel's past would be reenacted only in a much wider manner in the days of the Messiah. Thus, the whole past was symbolic and typical of the future. The tendency of the rabbis when they looked at the Old Testament prior to the coming of Jesus was to say almost everything's a type or a foreshadow. And because of that, while there are about 300 Old Testament prophecies of Jesus that we generally allude to, the rabbis had a lot bigger list. A lot of the time, they were probably right. But when you talk about foreshadows, it's possible to stretch something a little bit beyond what God had intended. Now, classifications of prophecy. And actually, this is where most of our work has been centered. If we talk about the way Matthew uses prophecy, the first two chapters give you a pretty comprehensive idea of what he is going to do with prophecy. Now, these are our categories, and we haven't gotten to the last one yet. He starts out with two very clear prophecies. Isaiah 7:14 about the virgin birth, and Micah 5 and verse 2 about Jesus being born in Bethlehem Ephraim. Those are crystal clear. You can see those. But then he goes to Hosea 11 and verse 1. Out of Egypt, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. And then Jeremiah 31 and verse 15, a voice was heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. Now, those are the two prophecies where critics and people who really want to understand the nature of prophecy, that's where they start to run into problems. Now, these are foreshadows. They are types. They're an incident, an image that points to a substance, to something later on that is going to be like it. And we would like to notice that when we talk about these foreshadows in Matthew, they're usually accompanied with a God said, go do this. In other words, God forced the issue. He made it happen because there's going to be a correlation between something that took place in the past and something that is presently happening now. Hosea 11 and verse 1, when Israel was a child, I loved him. It's pretty obvious that Matthew understood that that prophecy, first of all, was talking to the nation of Israel. Israel was God's son that he called out of Egypt. And he was going to do it again in the days of Jesus. Go down there. I want you to go there because there's going to be a correlation here. Jeremiah 31 and verse 15. Rachel weeping for her children. We kind of consider that Matthew knew that Jeremiah talked about Ramah, and he's talking about Bethlehem. Two different towns, but there's the similarity of events that takes place there where it demonstrates to us that way back in the past, In Jeremiah 31, God could already look ahead and know what was going to be in the days of the Messiah. These are foreshadows. This is an image that points to something in the future. Now, last week also, we speculated about the slaughter of the infants being directly connected to the death of Herod when he died at Jericho. And the reason we speculate on this is because the timing is just about right. And at the time of Herod's death, when he knew he was dying, he was losing his mind with the disease that he had. Won't get into that again. But he gave weird orders. He gave the order that you gather up all the Jewish aristocrats at the Hippodrome, and when I die, announce my death and kill all of them. And why did he want that done? He wanted to make sure at his death everybody was crying enough. He wanted tears. He wanted the nation weeping and mourning at the time of his death, so he'll kill all the people of consequence, and that'll do it. And at the same time, he ordered the death of his own son, Antipater. 5 days before Herod's death, he had Antipater killed. He's doing all kinds of strange, weird, murderous things. And this is about the time of the death of Jesus. Wouldn't be surprised at all if the order to execute the children came along at the same time. And the reason it would not get any press is because in the political world, the Hippodrome incident and the death of Antipater would have overshadowed it. Now, go to the last classification up on the screen. He shall be called a Nazarene. And that will take us to chapter 2 and verse 19. Okay, did you read Matthew 2, verses 19 through 23?
But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judah in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the region of Gilead and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene.
Okay, first thing I want to notice. An angel appears to Joseph and says, okay, everybody that sought the child's life is dead, go home. How many times so far have we seen an angel giving a revelation in Matthew? It's been a lot. In chapter 1 and verse 20, the angel appears to Joseph. In chapter 2 and verse 12, warned of God in a dream. And in 13, now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph. Joseph gets, angels communicating with him. In verse 19, when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream. And now again in verse 22, warned by God in a dream. You get the dreams, you get the angels, direct communication here. Now, he is told in verse 22 that he needs to go to the regions of Galilee. Don't go to Judea, go to Galilee. Keep your finger here, put a marker here, and go back to 1 Kings chapter 9. What we're going to say now about Galilee, probably everybody knows, but we want to emphasize it. Solomon has completed the temple, and Hiram has furnished a lot of the lumber. And Solomon has to pay off Hiram. And we want to notice how he does it. In 1 Kings 9 and verse 10, it came about at the end of 20 years in which Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house. Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber and gold according to all his desire. Then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. How are we going to pay off Hiram? For all the good work he did, we're going to give him 20 cities in Galilee. And then in verse 12, so Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they did not please him. He said, what are these cities which you have given to me, my brother? So they were called the land of Kabul to this day. What's Kabul mean? Good as nothing. Now that's always interesting to me. You stop and you think about that. Solomon pays off his debt to Hiram, gives him 20 cities in Galilee, and he looks at him and says, boy, that's worthless. What does that tell you about the region of Galilee? Even from the days of Solomon, 1,000 years before Christ, it's pretty worthless. Now, with that in mind, let's just stop and think about the city of Nazareth in Galilee. I don't know if Nazareth was one of the 20 cities. I don't even know if it existed at that time. But when it comes along, it's in this worthless region. How do you know Nazareth had a really bad reputation? Famous statement, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? So you got a worthless region, you got a worthless city with a terrible reputation. Now, and just imagine this, a town that is so bad it hurts your reputation just by coming from there. Can you think of a comparable city at the present time? If you come from this city, you say, I'm Scott from, people would go.
But you have a city called Blythe. That doesn't sound very good.
Yeah, Blythe and Needles, they're not too wonderful. I'd have thought San Francisco. I'm not wild about San Francisco. But, that's for a totally different reason. But the fact is, Galilee, Nazareth, this is the redneck, bottom of the barrel place as far as they're concerned. Yes.
Why?
Pardon me?
Why?
A really nice seeing they've got a fishing industry, but for some reason or another, they considered it worthless. I'm supposing it lacked lumber, and I'm supposing it was hilly enough you couldn't grow a whole lot on it. That's what I'm guessing.
Not all the cities in Galilee. It's not over by the sea.
Yeah, there's more than 20 cities in Galilee, I'm certain. But regardless, you could kind of look at it a little bit like Fresno. Does Fresno have a great reputation? Why? I like Fresno. Well, no, I don't. I like Clovis. What's wrong with Fresno? It's got an ugly name. Fresno is an ugly name. And for years and years, there were no roads going through Fresno. When you went through Fresno, you drove through on the 99, and what did you see? The absolute worst parts of town. Sometimes you get a reputation that's not 100% deserved, but largely deserved. Now, Galilee, Nazareth is a bad place as far as the rest of the country is concerned. The other thing about it, the intelligentsia did not live there.
That's a point in his favor.
Pardon me?
That's a point in his favor.
I would say so. But the people in Judea had their nose in the air because ignorant people lived in Nazareth and Galilee. Now, with that in mind...
Scott, this guy came from Tyre. So what would you think if you came from Monterey and went to Las Vegas? You would sort of go, yeah. So that could be kind of comparable.
Yeah.
You're on the coast at Tyre and you come inland a little bit. It's like, yeah.
This is a dump.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, Tyre had all the money in the world. I mean, it had all the money. And Galilee did not. Now, when we come back to Matthew 2, let's look at that 23rd verse. And came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. Does that look like a direct quotation? Looks like it should be to us. Okay, go find it. Where do you go in the Old Testament to find he shall be called Nazarene? Which prophet? None of them directly say that. But you notice he doesn't quote a prophet. He said the prophets. Like the prophet said, he shall be called a Nazarene. This is what we would call a summary. And I don't think a summary prophecy may not be the right word. It might just be summary of prophecies. Now, for a second, just run your mind over this. There are many summary passages in the Old Testament and New Testament concerning the prophets. For instance, jump ahead, if you have your marker in Matthew 2, jump ahead to Matthew 7 and verse 12. In the Sermon on the Mount, in everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. This is the law and the prophets. Treat people like you want to be treated. Can anybody find a direct quotation in the Old Testament that says, treat people like you want to be treated? No, but that sums up the message of the prophets. It's a summary statement of what the prophets taught. Let's go to Matthew 11 and verse 13. This is similar, though not quite the same thing. Matthew 11 and verse 13. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. All the prophets prophesied until John. Another verse by another writer says, until then, and now the kingdom of God is preached. What's that mean, all the prophets prophesied until John? Law and the prophets were until John. Does that mean the minute John the Baptist walked on the scene, the law of Moses was out of date and not in force? It means that was the point of emphasis up until that time. When John walked on the scene, all of a sudden the kingdom of God was the focal point. The law and the prophets were until John, and until then, and now the kingdom of God is preached. Now something else has captured attention. But the only part we really wanted to notice is the idea we're summing up. The law and the prophets were until John. Now let's go to Matthew 26:56. This is the arrest of Jesus. Jesus said, you could have taken me in the temple anytime you wanted. But in verse 56, all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets. You notice, all these things that just happened fulfill the scriptures of the prophets. Didn't quote any in particular. This is just kind of a summation of what the prophets had to say about how I was going to be arrested and taken away. Luke 1, verses 69 and 70. I'll start in verse 68. This is the prophecy of Zacharias. Luke 1:68. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited us and accomplished redemption for his people. And he has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of David his servants, as he spoke by the mouth of the holy prophets from of old. Raised up a horn of salvation, like he said in the prophets, like the prophets said. That's a summation. We're just going to sum up what the prophet said. He's going to save us, raise somebody up from David. Acts 26, verses 22 and 23. The Apostle Paul. So having obtained help from God, I stand to this day, testifying both to small and great, stating nothing but what the prophets and Moses said was going to take place, that the Christ was to suffer, and that by reason of his resurrection from the dead, he would be the first to proclaim light both to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. He says, all I'm saying is what the law and the prophets said. And then he sums it up. And, this is something we do today. I mean, if you take little Bible class kids, we're going to tell you what it's all about. The Old Testament is Jesus is coming. How do you finish that? And how do you finish it? It's coming again. Jesus is coming, Jesus is here, Jesus is coming again. Sometimes we summarize things. Now, you have these passages where the prophets are summarized, and we have a passage here. The prophet said, he shall be called a Nazarene. That's a summary. Now, the reason it gives us a hard time is it requires interpretation. What does it mean when you say he shall be called a Nazarene? There are two ways to go about this. Both of them work, but one might work a little better than the other. Now, when we say he shall be called a Nazarene, a school of thought, the word Nazarene, same root as, I believe it's Nazarite, but from the word netzer, which is a what? What's a netzer? It's a branch. We're making a connection between Nazarene and branch. Now, did the prophet say that Jesus would be the branch? They said that all over the place. Now, that is a possible connection. Now, would that be a positive connection or a negative connection? If you're looking at it from this point of view, hey, the prophet said he was the branch, that's extremely positive. But the question is, was this meant to be a positive connection? A little more, even though this works, a little more likely is the negative slant. Now, Nazareth. If you were from Nazareth, you were held in low esteem. You're held in contempt. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Is there any indication in the prophets that the Messiah would be held in low esteem and mistreated? Keep your finger in Matthew and go to Luke. Luke 2:34. And this is the one that to me, and you could argue this, but this is the passage to me that kind of tears it because it's given at the same time. In Luke 2 and verse 34, and Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel, and for a sign to be opposed. And boy, you're going to have a hard time too, Mary. What do you mean a sign to be opposed? Is it all going to be fun and games and laughter and roses for this child? Or is he going to get a hard time handed to him? Yes?
The way that I see it is that it's basically saying there's going to be plenty of reasons for people to want to be able to deny Jesus. What would that mean? He's from Nazareth.
He's from Nazareth. He's from nowhere. As a matter of fact, one of the Caesars made the comment that, am I supposed to believe that the Savior of the world, I don't think he used Nazareth, but his whole deal was he's an Israelite carpenter. Yes?
The common form of attack when you can't answer somebody's argument, you do ad hominem attack. You start attacking their character.
No, politicians never do that, do they?
No.
If you can't say anything else, just call him a loser. And yeah, that's pretty much it. He's a Nazarene. He's a loser. So it depends on whether you want to go positive or negative on this. If you want to think of it as connected to the concept of a branch, yeah, you got that throughout the Old Testament. If you want to say he shall be called a Nazarene, points out the fact that the prophets pointed out the fact that he would be persecuted, he would be killed, and held in contempt. Personally, I go with the latter because that, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Just sticks in my mind. But the prophecy is a summary of what the Old Testament had to say. And if you say on this subject, what subject? The esteem, the fact that he comes from this is a precursor to what's going to be in the future. So what we've got, if we talk about prophecy and the way he uses it, you can kind of grade prophecy. Some of it's crystal clear, some of it's a foreshadow, some of it might be in the form of a summary statement. Now, what we're going to be doing as we go through Matthew, and you may not be doing it, but I will try to remember to do this. Every time we come across a prophecy, try to stick it in one of these pigeonholes here. Or see if there's another category that needs to be brought into it. But not all prophecy is the same. Long time ago, a guy named James Bales wrote a book called Prophecy and Premillennialism. Pretty good book, talking about prophecy. Now, notice something. Go back to Matthew 2. Between Matthew 2 and verse 23 and Matthew 3 and verse 1, you got a big time gap. Here, it's about almost 30 years. If you go to Luke's account of the youth of Jesus, do you have the same time gap? Same time gap, only an incident at 12 years old is mentioned. So we have a lot of time that passes between the birth of Jesus and, he's going to bust out on the scene. And what I would like to do for a little bit, don't hate me for this, I like to think of the world and what was happening in the world at that time. The history of the Roman world at the time of the birth of Jesus, to see how one thing might impact the other. Now, here we go. Okay, there's your Roman world at the time of the birth of Jesus. The Romans were pushers. And when I say pusher, I mean pushed out in every direction, seeing what they could take. Wish I had more, but there's Italy up there in the corner. They rose to power in the 200 BCs. In that era, they consolidated their power. Rome was a city-state that had to first take over the Italian peninsula. And by the time we got into the 200s, they're ready to become a world power. And who's the first one they're really going to have to fight? Carthage, the Carthaginians. Down here, Hannibal. Y'all heard the story of Hannibal crossing the Alps. So they're pushing down south against the Carthaginians. Then they go over to the west and they're fighting the Gauls in the west. And they go up into the north and they're fighting the Germans up in the north. And then there's these guys over here. Now, if it had been me, I'd have been afraid of the Germans. But for some reason, the Romans were really afraid of the Parthians. Who are the Parthians? Where'd they come from? All right, quick history. 331 BC, Alexander the Great conquers the world, comes over here, goes clear over to India, and then he dies. His kingdom breaks up. And the part of the kingdom that was in this side of the world was the Seleucid Empire. And that's about 331, the Seleucids take over. And in the course of the next couple of 100 years, 300 years, while Rome is growing in power, the Seleucid Empire over here is really undergoing some changes. It's becoming a conglomeration of Greek and Persian and every other little tribe that's going on. But they finally come up with an empire, and the Parthians are really tough guys. So the Gauls are to the west of them, the Germans are to the north of them. the Carthaginians have been down here, but they've already been subdued, and the Parthians are a big problem. And they're afraid of the Parthians. Now, keep that in mind. You see that circle there? That's where the Parthians meet the Romans. And you notice that's to the north of Jerusalem, which means that's going to have an impact. Now, here's what's going on at the Roman world at the birth of Jesus. You notice Augustus Caesar, the big dog. 31 BC, he had conquered Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium. And by 27 BC, the empire just conferred on him all kinds of glory and honor. So he's the big guy there. He reigns from 27 BC to 14 AD. Okay, 14 AD is about the time Jesus is in the temple as a little boy. 14 AD, that's about the time Jesus is in the temple. So Jesus is growing up with Augustus and the Roman Empire doing all kinds of stuff. Now, Augustus takes over 27 BC and then 20 BC. Augustus and Tiberius retrieved the standards from the Parthians. Okay. You don't have to remember this, but some of this stuff puts the Bible world in perspective. 53 BC, the Battle of Carrhae. And we'll just back it up. Battle of Carrhae took place right there at the circle. Carrhae is another name for heron, biblical heron. 53 BC, there was a Roman general named Crassus, who was the richest guy in Rome, but he wanted military glory, so he led an army over to fight the Parthians. Because the Romans and the Parthians were always fighting over Armenia, believe it or not. Crassus takes an army of about 35,000 over to Parthia, and it looks like it ought to be a wipeout, but the Parthians figured out all we got to do, because they're out here in our desert, all we got to do is take our light cavalry and just run around them in circles and fire arrows at them, and eventually they'll all take an arrow. And a lesser army on horseback just went around in circles like the Mongols would do, and they annihilated that Roman army and took their standards. And you've probably all seen movies where the Romans lost their ego and everybody was all upset. That's true. Well, they lost it. 53 BC. 33 years later, when Augustus has come to the throne, Augustus and Tiberius, who is a young guy, rising star, they go to Parthia and negotiate the return of the eagle. And of course, being politicians, they spun that. They negotiated because they were afraid of us. And it might have been true, but they got that eagle back. And that was a big deal. And then a little bit of time goes on. 9 AD, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Tell me you've heard of that. The Battle of the... You have, you just don't know it. Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. This is with the Germans. Now, Augustus, he's going to send a Roman general named Varus up into Germany. 3 legions, about 18,000 men, and auxiliaries, which probably put him up around 25,000. Well, by the way, what's an auxiliary? Mercenaries, guys that are fighting on your side even though they're not from your country. 3 legions plus auxiliaries. One of the auxiliaries was a German by the name of Arminius, who led him up into the Teutoburg Forest, and guess what? Strung them all out, and then the Germans massacred him because he was turncoat. They like to never got over that. That was a horrible defeat. Those 3 legions were totally wiped out. It was so bad that Augustus used to wake up at night hollering, "Varus, give me back my legions." I mean, it was a blowout, and that rocked the Roman world. Try it again. But they survived it, and they got back, and finally, AD 14, Augustus dies. Now, Augustus, in the past, had kind of wanted Tiberius to take over for him. But Tiberius kind of got worn out with life. He had a lot of bad things happen. And so the guys that were supposed to take over for Augustus, they got killed, so they had to call upon Tiberius, who probably didn't really want the job in the first place. But Tiberius was different. Here's Tiberius. You got all this area Rome has taken in. All they can do is push, 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 push. Tiberius didn't want to push. Tiberius's attitude was, you know what we need to do right now? We need to just stop and consolidate our gains, settle some of the chaos that's going on at this time. Now, that was the Tiberius attitude. Matter of fact, he took over in 14 AD, and he stood it for about 12 years and moved to the Isle of Capri and ruled from there and left everything in the hands of Sejanus, who was the captain of the guard, the Praetorian Guard, right-hand man. Everything goes through Sejanus, and I'll make the final decisions. Well, Sejanus, who he trusted implicitly, started plotting against him. And finally, in 31 AD, when Tiberius figured out what was going on, came back and executed him in 31 AD. But during that time, 31 AD, you got to concentrate on what's going on at Rome. So we're going to be consolidating the empire and focusing on the city of Rome. Okay, what's going on in 31 AD?
A lot of resistance comes, one of which including a lot of anti-Roman sentiment starting to rise in Israel with the Zealots.
Yeah, this is what we're going to bring in too. Could you see where, by the way, 31 AD, who's arriving on the scene in 30 and 31 AD during the midst of all this chaos where they have to concentrate on Rome? And Tiberius wants to calm things down. John the Baptist and Jesus. Can you see how what was going on in the political situation for a moment in time helped what was going to happen in the spread of the gospel? Sometimes we say in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. We talk about, Roman roads, Greek language. Sometimes it's just the plain old political madhouse settled down for a little bit. But that's what we are looking at the time of Jesus, when John the Baptist and Jesus come into the world. Now, yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Rome was also in kind of a golden age in that there was no real major wars. It was a relatively peaceful, short point of time with Tiberius, if I remember.
Yeah, it was, because who did Tiberius leave in charge after he died in 37 AD? Caligula. And if you know Caligula, that's things kind of headed south real quick after that. All right, let's go back to Matthew 3. All of a sudden, we have John the Baptist. Now, in those days, John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, saying, all of a sudden we have John the Baptist, and he says that, hey, here's John the Baptist. It's almost like he's assumed you've heard a little bit about the story, and you know who John the Baptist is. Now, Luke gives us the personal details about John the Baptist. Matthew does not. And he's preaching in the wilderness of Judea, and next week I'll remember to have a map. Now, question, what's he preaching? You would think that, well, boy, after going through all this history, you'd probably want to talk about Archelaus and all the kids that took over after Herod's death. We kind of talk about that a lot. For just a second, let's just map out the preaching of John the Baptist and see how far we can go. No, we don't have time for that. I'd like everybody to look at something, then come back to it. Something to think about. Okay, this doesn't prove anything. It's just something I'd like you to look at. If you have that mark, go back to Isaiah chapter 40. All right, we're going to be looking at a prophecy concerning John the Baptist when we get back to Matthew 3. But in Isaiah 40 and verse 3, we have that prophecy. A voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Okay, we're acquainted with that prophecy. We all know. Okay, John the Baptist. Here's what I'd like you to notice. Look at chapters 36 through 39 in Isaiah. I'll give it to you real quick. 36 through 39, it's a historical interlude. You got this hardcore prophecy all through the book of Isaiah. Then all of a sudden you got 4 chapters about how the Assyrians came and take away the northern kingdom, but Hezekiah withstood them with God's help. 36 through 39. And then you have chapter 40, which talks about John the Baptist getting the highway ready. Go back to chapter 35. 36 through 39 almost seem parenthetical in some ways. Look back at chapter 35, and what's he talking about? A couple of verses to look at. We'll make it simple. Verse 7. The scorched land will become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, its resting place, grass becomes reeds and rushes. A highway will be there, a roadway, and it will be called the highway of holiness. The unclean will not travel on it, but it will be for him who walks that way, and fools will not wander on it. What are we talking about?
A broad path.
A broad path. A highway. Now, 36 through 39, historical interlude. But if you look at this next week, kind of read Isaiah 35 and 36 together and see if they do not connect in your mind. And we'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Clovis Church of Christ Sermon Podcast. For more information, please visit us at clovischurchofchrist.org.